Okay, everyone, good evening. I know we're an hour late, but better late than never. Couldn't decide what I was going to teach tonight. Didn't have the proper time to prepare. Started a few new classes this week. I was also away. Did some traveling today, so I was a little discombobulated. And so I'm going to teach a very short discourse. It's very insightful, and we'll see where it goes. I was really gonna teach something I decided last week, but then I was afraid it would take us a few weeks, and I didn't want to go away from the parsha. So let's try to do a short little discourse on Noach this week, and then next week we can continue, and as a result of that, hopefully stay to the parsha. So this is in Sefer Or HaTorah from the Tzemach Tzedek, and it is on page 134. This is the first volume on Bereshis from the Tzemach Tzedek Or HaTorah. Memorim on Lakutei Torah we've already completed. Okay, here we go. Inyan Teivas Noach. The idea, the concept of Teivas Noach, of Noach's ark. So we know he's going to explain the spiritual dynamics of the ark. What was the ark has very specific measurements. There's so much written upon it, but there's very interesting insight from the Tzemach Tzedek on what is the idea of the ark. But in order to understand what the ark is, we have to understand the ark is coming to protect from the flood. And we understand that the flood is a physical waters that are very intense, and the ark was there as a physical protection. It was a form of a ship that was able to save Noach and his family. But that's only the physical. Let's understand the spiritual. There was a powerful destructive force in the world, and you needed a super powerful form of protection against that spiritual destructive force. So he's going to explain the spiritual dynamics of both the flood, of the destructive forces, to understand what that was, and to understand what is necessary in order to gain protection. Maybe we can think afterwards and try to figure out what that means to us, because he doesn't talk so much in regards to to us what this means. Maybe there's something that we can figure out. But let's begin. Inyan Teivas Noach, the idea of the Teiva of the Noach. So let's understand what was first unleashed during the generation of the flood. Now, we know that the generation of the flood were very corrupt. They were corrupt in many ways. In many ways, Rashi says that they were punished primarily because of their sins regarding disrespect for each other. They were Benadam L'Chavero sins. These were sins that were pertaining between man and man. The world became so corrupt that everybody helped themselves to whatever they wanted. There was no sense of morality in the world that people would take, and people would respect other people's property. Everybody was stealing and robbing and so on and so forth. Whoever was stronger than the other, it was the survival of the fittest, and the way literally was a jungle. Whoever had more power than the other was able to take advantage and rob and take away or whatever their heart desired, without anybody stopping them. There was also the idea that there was a lot of immorality in the world. Rashi says there was gezel, theft, and znus, which is the immorality regarding to people's sexual life. And over there, they were very, very sinful. So that was the primary sins during that time. But then, according to the mysticism, and I think it's brought already in Midrash as well, the pasuk says, "Ki hishchis kol basar es darchei ala aretz." The people were mashchis their ways. They destroyed their ways. What does that mean? Some kind of an internal destruction. So it is, as it is explained, that one of the primary sins of this generation was that they wasted seed. We're dealing with a world in which everything is today's days also wanting to be made permissible, to the point that we talk about the sin of abortion and so on and so forth, in which people feel that just because it's inconvenient to a person, they're going to take the life of a child. But here we're not even talking once the life is born, but even before that, the potential seed to create a child is very sacred, and it should not be wasted. And it's considered a serious sin. although it's not explicitly stated in the Torah as a sin, it is derived from the pasuk, and according to the sages, it's considered very, very serious. The problem is that to their generation doesn't seem that there was any prohibition on it, because it not necessarily is a prohibition to Gentiles. The Torah was given so that this is a prohibition and given to the Jewish people. When it comes to the Gentile, one of the 7 Noahide laws, for instance, we don't have the prohibition of wasting seed. Why would there be a punishment according to the Zohar? It seemed like that the main punishment, the generation of the flood, was because they wasted their seed, which wasn't even a sin. So how come, or at least it's not something they were told it is a sin to them? So then how come it would evoke such punishment? So he's going to explain a very interesting idea. And I'm going to say it briefly. The wasting of the seed itself did not cause, it's an amazing idea. The wasting of the seed itself did not cause the flood. It's just that when there is, it enabled the punishment for all the other sins that they did. It was everything else that they did that was corrupt, that was really, really, really causing and bringing about God's fury. It was bringing about God's anger. Now, had they not wasted their seed, they would have been able to calm that anger. There's a certain balance. If there is, God forbid, a wrath, if there's, God forbid, an evoking of judgment above, which demands, which is calling for some kind of a retribution for the acts of human beings. So then there is something called the anti heat, just like in a car, in an engine. An engine automatically will heat up. It will heat up because the friction is causing it to heat, and it will overheat. So in order to prevent it from overheating, you need coolant. When you have coolant, the coolant cools the engine and make sure that the engine does not get overheated, right? If you run out of coolant, then the problem in the car is not that there's no coolant. The problem is there's a heat, that it overheats. But why did it overheat? Because there's no coolant. So there's a certain innate system within creation that when there is a judgment that is evoked, there is always an anti-thing that comes and cools it off. Because God knows that if he was to act with the world in immediate measure for measure, if Hashem was going to act with the world to respond, to reciprocate to our actions immediately and punish in the way that, just because, mankind has provoked God in a certain way, and therefore to bring immediate punishment, the world would not stand a day. So therefore, there are powerful forces that cool the fire of you can say of upsetness in the Creator when he sees his creation is being wrecked by irresponsible people, or so on and so forth, causes a real anger and a wrath. So there is an automatic system in where there is coolant that cools it. And what is that coolant? It's an amazing thing. That coolant is masculine waters. According to the mystical understanding of the way the world operates, is that the actual creation is controlled by the source of creation within God is a feminine attribute called the attribute of kingship. And from the attribute of kingship, that's where God is operating, directing, influencing, and engaged and involved in the world. Because the attribute of kingship, in other words, it's that sense within God where God says, I want to be a king. And because his desire to be a king expects obedience. So when there is disobedience in this attribute of malchus, it creates a very, very gevurot. These are called gevuras. It's called judgments. Judgments are evoked in malchus. And this is very dangerous because when malchus, which is the source of creation, is provoked with a lot of judgments, it ultimately results in very harsh things that happen in this world. Terrible things can happen. Devastation, destruction, all kinds of terrible calamities can befall the creation. So the gevura in malchus, which is, we said, that's the overheating of the engine, in order for it to be balanced, Hashem set it up with a system that it calms down. How does it calm down? When a introduction of infinite energy way above this attribute of malchus comes flowing into malchus and kind of calms her upset. In other words, from within her own world, she gets very upset about the little things that are happening within the world, or big things in her eyes. But when that happens, there needs to be a hamshacha, a certain flow into Malchus to calm the Shekhinah down, to calm Malchus down, not to act in an angry fashion. And how does that happen? And that's called the masculine lights. When the masculine flow of energy comes into Malchus, it's almost like, I'll give a little example, which I usually give. This is an example we spoke many times. A woman who's trying to deal with her children, with her household. She gets worked up. She's had it with her kids. She's so upset. She's so angry. She's ready to really punish them in a very severe way. And her husband comes home and he's been a little detached. He's not so invested. He's not so engaged. He's not so involved. He's able to calm her down and put into her mind a little bit more of a broader perspective, not to get so overworked over the daily upsetnesses of the small little things that happen. She should have vision of a greater picture, of the longer picture, and as a result of that, he calms her down. That's in a more psychological way. There is a more physical element of that. The woman gets worked up with her gevuras. In the intimacy, that's the mashal that is given over here, the example that's given, in the intimacy that she has with her husband. Now, the male energy is an energy of kindness. The woman's energy is an energy of severity, of gevura. That's just the way they are. Man is water and woman is fire. So you bring the water into the fire, it calms the fire. So if we can see that in headquarters as well, up there, all the way in the source of creation being the feminine element of the divine that gets overheated. When there is an intimacy and masculine waters from the higher elements of God that are called masculine lights come down into Malchus, they serve as a coolant to weaken the gevuras of Malchus. And then even if the world deserves punishment, it's calm. It might happen, but very, very delicately and very calmly. It doesn't come with wrath. It doesn't come with fury. But God forbid, if there's no coolant flowing, if there's no intimacy taking place from above of the masculine waters flowing into the feminine waters, what happens, it coming flowing into the feminine fire. So what happens is it overheats, and then you can end up with a flood. You can end up with a calamity, a universal, a horrible thing going on in the world. And that's what happened generation of the flood. There were many, many things that were there to upset God. There were many of the things to call forth for punishment. But as long as there was a system was still in check, that the masculine energies were still calming down the feminine source of control, of government, so to speak, force, the divine governorship, which is the attribute of Malchus. As long as it was calming it down, there was nothing. There was no big punishment. It didn't call for definitely not a flood. But what happened at that time? Because of the wasted seed that was going on, enormously, even though it wasn't a sin, but everything above is impacted by below. If mankind is behaving in a certain way down here, it impacts the way things are in the spiritual dynamics. So when in the physical world, the energy of the masculine energy, the masculine seed, the masculine projection is not getting to the intended target, which is the female, because the people are wasting their seed. So instead of their union with their wives, what we would say in a kosher way, a productive intimacy, where the man is releasing their spiritual masculine energy of kindness to the woman, the recipient, who's receiving that, and as a result of that, it's bringing her calmness. If that wasn't happening down here in this world, it wasn't happening in the spiritual source of the cosmic scheme as well. So there was no more masculine light to cool the gevura that was brewing and getting stronger and stronger in Malchus, in the source of creation. And as a result of that, all the other sins that were done caused and called forth this intense fury which brought about the flood. So according to this, we can understand it was primarily the other sins that caused the flood. But what this particular sin caused is that it prevented the calming element that is required to keep creation kind of steady and good. So let's read inside. In the Inyan of Daramabul, the sin of the generation of the flood, in which they corrupted their ways on the earth. It says that in which they were wasting seed, and this is called Eitzah Zera Levatal. So just like physically, he explains in the male or in the Yesh Beis Nekavim, there are two in the by a person. There are in the what you would call the sexual organ of a man. There are two channels, two pipes, if you can say, two channels. Echad, number one, Shabo Yotzei Hazera. One is from where the seed comes forth. The echad, the seminal drops the seed. The echad, and the other one, Shabo Yotzei Hashesen, from where the urine comes out. Ki Yidu, as it is known. I once saw that the letter tzaddik, which is associated with Yesod. Yesod is the genitals, man's genitals. It's called Yesod. But tzaddik, the letter tzaddik, has two heads, which represent these two channels. One from which the semen goes out, and the other one is from where the urine goes out. Now, what's the difference between urine and semen? The difference is it's a world of a difference, because the semen that comes out, the semen that is transmitted, is the deepest, most powerful, potent, innermost substance of the human being. It's where the human being takes a replica of himself. The human being is taking his entire essence, transmitting it, and that's what's creating another human being. It's the most potent power within a human being, the power, the reproductive power. And it's really, really in which it's the one power in which the human being is so godlike, because you only God can create, and here a human can also create. So from this seed, the energy is so powerful. There isn't any kind of a influence that a human can influence. For instance, a teacher, a scientist, a great doctor, or whatever it is, professor, could be influencing, teaching, and giving information. It's only external. It's information. It's the knowledge of your mind. It's not your mind itself. Can you ever give someone a piece of your mind? And I don't mean that in the slogan, a piece of your mind. I'll give you a piece of my mind. The only way to really give someone a piece of your mind is actually in an intimacy. You're taking a piece of your brain. You're taking your very self. Substance is carrying your very, very innermost of your very being. And it has your essence of your soul in it. And that's where you can create a whole new human being. So that's one flow. The other flow is urine. What's urine? Urine is the waste, the most external of external, whatever your body doesn't need, the wasted, I guess, toxic liquid that's not good, it shouldn't stay in your body, and it has to go out. And both come out from the same place. So it's an interesting thing. There is a flow. One of them is the pnimi shebepnimi, is the innermost of the innermost, and the other one is the most external of the external. And yet they both are going through the genital of the person. Yet, now just like obviously the human being, now we're learning this over here, it's not a biology class, we're learning over here spiritual biology. So we're learning it, the reflection as it's reflected up there in the highest realm. In the divine, and as much as God created us in his image, in the divine there is also the element called the supernal idea of Yesod, and it too has two pipelines. One of it in which it's transmitting the deepest innermost of the divine to the Shekhinah, to the feminine receptor, which is the source of the cosmos, the source of all of creation. And then there's another channel which is coming from the same place, but it's external energy. And what's the difference between the two? He explains. Now, urine doesn't need a recipient. Urine, if you urinate in the toilet, that's what you should do. It goes and flush it down. It's not meant to be received because it's external. It doesn't need to be received. but what is precious, and that is the creative drop, semen. That's a very, very deep thing. That is should be very selective. That should only go where it needs to go, because if God forbid we send it where it doesn't go, first of all, we're giving enormous power to the unholy, because you're not directing it towards the right receptacle. So then it's being wasted, it's going out, and forces of unholiness get a hold of that intense energy. That's number one. And right. Number two, I forgot what I was saying. Okay, see, the kachyav on the mila. I was number one, number two. I don't even remember anymore. Kachyav on the mila derech marshal, but adam elyon, the supernal man above. The pchinas yesoid, from the element of yesoid, yesh beis hamshachas. There are two hamshachas, two flows. Nekav azera, there is the hole, or the pathway, where the zera, the seed, yamini, and that's on the right side within the genitals, if you can say. V'hu b'chinas chasadim, and that's a powerful flow of masculine energy, which is a very, very powerful form of kindness. Umemenu, we're talking about spiritually in the divine. Umemenu, and from it, yoitzim nishmas Yisrael, and that's the power of the Jewish soul. Powerful souls that are coming into the world are from the innermost of the divine, and they flow to the Shekhinah, and they calm the Shekhinah. When the Shekhinah is frustrated with her creation, she's the soul of creation, and when she's frustrated with the constrictions and with the darkness and with the sinfulness and whatever it is within the creation, when Hashem has intimacy with her, when there is an intimacy between the masculine and the feminine element, and he's giving her the masculine waters, which is, what does that mean? He's sending souls into the world. Another neshama coming into the world brings such brightness and such light to the Shekhinah that it takes away so much judgments. It's amazing. Never thought of that. That just by having children, just by bringing holy souls into the world, we are removing so much catastrophe. There's no greater blessing. There's nothing that has the power to take away so much judgment and so much human suffering like the introduction of another soul into this world. Because a soul is so powerful and so beautiful, and therefore it produces such calming effect in the Shekhinah, the mother who's received from her husband this powerful infusion of this new neshama that's going to come to the world. Shenikra b'shem zera, that's called seed. V'nimshachem b'nukva, it's drawn into the female. He malchus, which is malchus, datzilus. Like it says, v'zarati hali, and I have planted for me ba'aretz, in the land. Aretz, earth, the land, is another term for the attribute of malchut. Malchus is called earth because she's the last and final sphera, just like the earth is the lowest element. So to Malchus, she's the last attribute before creation begins. So it's called earth. And just like what do you do in the earth? You plant seeds in the earth. So that idea of the male energy flowing to the female is like planting a seed in the earth. And just like the earth takes that seed and produces vegetation, so to the woman takes the seed she receives from the man and produces children. Same idea. But what is the effect of that? In addition to it producing souls and having such a contribution to the world, in addition to that, it's calming all the judgment and all the severity that is in the source, in the Shekhinah, which, if chas v'shalom, God forbid, it's not calmed, it can end up going completely out of check and becoming a force of incredible retribution and punishment in the world. And he says, and through this, nimtakin gevura is the nukva. The gevura of the nukva, the feminine, the intensity, the gevura element, that's the fire of the female, which is very fiery and very, very, in this case, the gevuras would be more the judgments of her va'oz, and then mishtatfen beis hazriyos the duchra v'nukva, and then they combine the masculine infusion and her own, like we know in creation of a child, it's the sperm that gets together with the woman's. What does the woman have? The egg that she produces, and together between her ovulation and his sperm together create the child. But in this case, and this together creates a complete soul. And then you have a neshama, a new neshama born into the world, and the fringe benefit of a new soul into this world that inevitably is going to happen is that a lot of judgments are removed. A lot of people that were supposed to be punished are not punished. And those that are yet punished, their punishment is much lighter. And there's much more blessing in the world, and so many terrible things and terrible possible potential decrees are averted. And things are way, way better. So that's that's the right side, where the man is producing and sending and channeling that seminal drop. The neck of Hashesen, but then there is the other hole and the other channel, and where the urine flows. Huasmali, that's on the left side. Ubchen is Gavurais, and that's to begin with waste. It's also Gavura. It's not Chesed. Chesed is on the right. It's a flow of Gavura. And this also is a flow. We're talking about God. So we're talking about even what we would consider waste is still in abundance. But it's the external energy. And that's meant for the external worlds, including also the nations of the world. In other words, there is the innermost, that's the pneumius, that's meant to go into holiness, and to the Jewish people, and from the Jewish people, it's meant to disseminate into the rest of the world. But then there is an external energy, which is called the shesen, which is like the urine, which that is from the very start meant to be for the external elements of existence and creation. Pirish, what does that mean? Makar, it's a source, the shoirish, and a root, the hisavus, to bringing about nishmaiseyem, the souls of Klippa, the souls of the unholy. They're coming from the secondary influence, the secondary flow, which is called the shesen, not the inner seminal right side drop, which is producing the inner souls. Now the people in the time of the flood, which they wasted that seed, what did they do? Garmu, they caused Amshacha, the Yanika, that it should be drawn and it should be given, derived, because everything we do has cosmic repercussions. Because we're like a little miniature, but we control the entire, we're like the motherboard, even though we're tiny and miniature, but our little actions have cosmic repercussions. So when a person down here below is wasting the seed, what that is causing above is that the supernal yesod above, in the supernal man, talking about in the what's called, obviously we have to understand, I know I'm talking about sexual type of things, and we're talking about God over here, talking about the divine. So we need to understand that all this is anthropomorphically speaking. We have to realize that this is higher and higher and higher and higher and higher and infinitely higher than our understanding. But we have just a tiny little metaphor from our lives to represent very, very deep cosmic ideas and incredible, powerful cosmic energies. So in the supernal man above, which is we're made in the image, so there too, there is a head, and there's hands, and there's feet, there's 248 limbs, including the Yesod element. So if we're, God forbid, down here, we're sending the energy, the inner energy out into the Klippa. So the same happens above. The inner energy from the supernal man coming from the right side, which is the chesed, which is this coolant that we spoke about earlier that prevents the overheating if it would reach the Shekhinah, if it would reach the supernal feminine element, hakol, but instead it's going l'chitzonim, it's going to the outside. Because the zera levatala, because you've given it to waste. And then, so there's two things. There is something, this is what I meant when I said two things earlier. Number one is that the energy is going to the outside. It's not going where it's supposed to. Number two is that meaning it's going to where it's not supposed to. But the other problem is it's not going where it is supposed to. And then she's lacking. So she's building up anger and frustration, and there's nothing there to come in and to bring in the kindness to cool it down. So the zera, the seed of the supernal man, is not being transmitted into malchus of atzilus. Nukva datzilus means the feminine element of the world of emanation, which is the Shekhinah, which is the source of creation. And what happens then? This oiderubchen is gevuras benukva. Then the gevurais, the judgments that there are in the female element of the Shekhinah, are only getting more intensified without the husband to calm it down. Because the seed of the male is not sweetening it. When the male energy is passed over to the recipient, the way it should be, how is that achieved? Through this intimacy of male and female, then the masculine energies of the male, are sweetening the judgments of the female. But when this is lacking, and you don't have the hamshacha, the flow of masculine seminal energy, which is the energy of kindness, and the gevurais remain without any sweetening. And that's the reason why it was churning, meaning the gevura the upsetness was getting stronger. It's like, a person gets upset, and then you have friends, good people, sometimes a spouse, and so we have to calm you down. When you don't have anybody around you, whatever, and it's just being allowed to get unchecked, and then you can go into a state of being you go crazy. So that's kind of thing is what happened above. And that's why the mabul came upon them, this flood, through their actions. They weren't commanded at all not to waste seed, but it was a technical issue. It's not that they were punished for wasting seed. It's because of their wasting seed, technically, now they were going to pay for every other thing that they did, which would have been kind of forgiven. But in this case, there's nothing to bring about that forgiveness because there's no masculine energy. Yeah. Even though they weren't commanded, as he says, they were not commanded to not to remove seed. So this provoked upon them the gevurais, from the gevura that there is in Malchus. Malchus has a lot of gevura inside of her. Because they remained built to mimutakim, they remained unsweetened. And then another thing happened. This is the beginning of the flood. It started with this, but then once Malchus was brewing up a fire, and that fire just exploded like a volcanic eruption of judgment on the world that literally wiped out all life on the planet. Now he says even more than that. The lower gevurais, the gevurais that there are in Malchus, provoked even a higher level of judgment. We know there are the left side is the side of fire and the side of gevura, and that's the feminine side. The right side is the masculine side, which is the flow of energy downward, which is more an energy of kindness. So, but we know that there are two primary levels, both in the right and in the left. The lower level in the left side, in this case, is and the feminine side is Malchus. Malchus is the lower level, and Bina, which is much, much higher than Malchus, Bina is the supernal mother. Two females, like mother, like daughter. Generally, the place that is the most dangerous, when you got the most gevura, that could be dangerous gevura, is the lower gevuras. The higher gevuras are more. They're not such harsh judgments. They're judgments, but not harsh judgments. But when the gevuras of Malchus get overheated, they can draw down the gevuras from Bina as well, the gevura from the supernal feminine element called the mother, over there as well, and then you have fire from above and fire from below. Together they create an inferno that is just horrible. And that's what he explains happened. What does it say happened with the water? After the flood came for 40 days and 40 nights, it continued from below. It continued to intensify more and more and more and more. And then the waters went higher and higher and higher and higher until they covered the highest mountains. 15 cubits above the top of the mountains were completely covered. And then 15 cubits from above the waters prevailed and got stronger. And they covered the mountains. So what is the significance of this? Obviously, we know that the regular story is a lot of water, and it covered all the mountains, and the entire dry land, the entire earth became an ocean. It was all submerged with water. But what is the spiritual meaning that the mountains were covered? So the mountains are the masculine energies. Our forefathers are called mountains. Abraham, for instance, called a mountain. Generally, all our forefathers are called mountains. And they are forces of kindness. So God set up within the system powerful forces of kindness. And those kindness are supposed to kind of counter the judgments. But because there was such an intensification of judgments that they covered over the mountains, you couldn't even see the mountains. And why were the mountains covered over that you couldn't even notice these projections, these powerful forces of love? God's love was completely overwhelmed. God's kindness was completely overwhelmed by the judgment. And that's because the judgment was coming from below and from above at the same time. The hot boiling waters were coming from below and from the top. And almost like we say fire from below and fire from the top. Because we know the system is like this. There is a Bina, which is the mother. Then come the 6 emotions, which are all masculine, which you have these mountains. And then comes Malchus. Malchus is the most hands-on operating creation, the Shekhinah, Malchus. Now, we spoke earlier that Malchus gets worked up from the sins, from the world's corruption, it gets worked up. Usually the masculine waters come and calm that down. We learned before what the technical problem was, that those masculine waters were not reaching. So it allowed Malchus to brew and brew and brew and brew until she had this incredible storm of wrath. But that storm of wrath provoked also the waters, the fire from above, which are the fires of Bina. So now you had fire from Bina and Malchus, from above and from below, and these two together covered over the mountains. That means that there's no more noticeable kindness. The kindness of God was completely concealed and covered. And that's why that entire year there was not a drop of kindness coming from God. Besides in the flood. But the flood was not coming, the kindness that was, not in the flood, besides in the ark, where Noach was. But that wasn't coming from the mountains, because Noach was floating above the mountains. It wasn't God's kindness from the mountains, so to speak, from the God's attributes of kindness that was protecting Noach. Noah's protection had to come from a much higher place, because the kindness, the attributes of kindness themselves were overwhelmed by it's almost like you have a very kind person, but suddenly, because someone messed with his children, for instance, or someone did something very atrocious that hurt him very deeply, and suddenly the man goes into a fury, into a rage, into an anger, to the point that you can't even tell that this was ever a kind person. The kindness is completely overwhelmed by the wrath and the anger. And that's what happened during the flood. There was not a trace of divine kindness left. The only time in history, there was no kindness there at all. When you say the ark and all those that were saved, that's from a different place. And we'll soon see what that was. So let's continue. And therefore, as he says, the Gevura is the Nukva, because the Gevura is of Nukva. The Gevura is coming from Malchus. They aroused and they provoked Gevurais from even a higher place. Even from the level of Bina. Makar ha-Gevurais, the source of Gevura. From the 5 powers of Gevura that there are in Bina. It's a Kabbalistic concept that in Bina there are 5 powers of Gevura. Nimshach aleim gam kein hadin. The judgment came down upon them even from this level as well. And therefore, and that's why it covered the mountains. Who are the mountains? Avos Nikra Harim. The forefathers, the patriarchs, they're called mountains. Like it says, Shimu Harim Riv Hashem. Here, mountains, the God's quarrel, Hashem's quarrel. The Imais and the mothers, Nikragavais, and the mothers, the matriarchs, they're called hills. Jamharim Ketanim, which are smaller mountains. Which represent the Avais, represent Chesed, Gevurah, Teferes, kindness, severity, and Teferes. But they're all considered, even the severity over here in this case is considered masculine emotions, which therefore are dominantly kind. And Netzach and Hod, which are the associated more with the mothers, as it is known. Generally, the conduct of the world, God generally's conduct with the world is through kindness and through compassion. Kindness is Abraham, and Jacob is compassion. And these are powerful, pivotal forces that are necessary for the world to keep on running. There's so much goodness happening. God is feeding the world continuously, sustaining the world, warming the world. The infinite kindness coming from Hashem and the infinite compassion of God, which are these mountains. And now, Yom Rishon Chesed Avram, the first day, Sunday, it's the kindness of Abraham, Chulu. So usually that's there, but now the mountains were covered. Because they provoke these powerful forces of Gevurah, the Ema, and from the 5 Gevuras of Ema of mother, which means fire from above and fire from below, and now so the mountains got covered. Min ha-Gevurah because the Gevuras overwhelmed them. Mikol tziddadeim, from all sides. Mila'el umilitachas, from above and from below. Militachas, from below, from below it was the powerful water. We know by the flood that's what was happening. There was water coming from below, destructive water coming from below. And there was also destructive water storming from above. And the spiritual meaning of that is that the waters of the flood, which were the fiery waters, they were coming from Malchus, which is below, and they were also coming from Bina, which was above. And Gevurah is the Nuklon Elam, from above. Gevurah is the aim of the Gevurah of mother. Shem Lamayla Midas, they come from above the Midas. Gevurah is Kifais Elo, from these powerful forces of Gevurah, without any masculine light and energy to calm it. It was like, mother and daughter going off on a rage. And the mountains got covered up to the point that the kindness of Avram was futile, wasn't even heard, was overshadowed, overwhelmed into a faint whisper, and no one can even hear the demands of kindness. The kindness of Abraham could not stand up to this fury. Like we find next week in the Torah portion, or 2 weeks from now, is that Avram Avinu stands up and he fights when God wants to punish Sodom. He puts up a fight because he's kindness. Kindness seeks always kindness to avert punishment and so on and so forth. Hashem to give more time and to be patient and so on and so forth, give another chance. But over here, the kindness was muted. It was so muted because it was such a powerful wrath that Avram knew he stood no chance. He was buried in this tsunami of fury. So then how is Noach going to be saved? If there's no kindness here, where is Noach's where is the saving power to save Noach? That's why we have to look a little deeper and see the measurements of the Teva. We'll find where there could be a force that can stand up against this fury and at least create a space where this fury will not arrive and where there will still be God's sustaining goodness. And the idea over here is that the only way to save Noach was to circumvent the entire system and go outside the system, go above the entire system. All this that we discussed earlier is all on a level where there is already what we call the supernal man. And over there is the feminine side and the masculine side. And that's really usually where the energy flow to creation comes from the supernal man, from the sphirot, from the attributes. And usually there's a good balance between kindness and severity. Because of the technical element that we spoke about before, it caused that the feminine energies of fire overwhelmed the masculine lights to the point that there wasn't a trace of it at all. And that's what brought all this wrath and anger on the world. But now, in order to save Noach had to be lifted up outside the entire system. It's almost like Noach did not exist within the universe. He was lifted above it all. And where did Noach go to? He went he reached or God protected him from the energy of Keter. Keser. What's Keser? Keser is above all the attributes. And over there's only pure, infinite, unadulterated mercy. Mercy that has no calculations at all, has no reasoning at all. It's just pure, infinite mercy and kindness. And that's already above creation. It's above even a relationship with creation. That's higher and infinitely above and beyond. And that's where Noach's Teva was being protected from. And only from that infinite energy of kindness can it create sort of this shield, this protection place with a fury that was raging. The judgment that was raging could not touch. And he's going to show us how in the measurements of the Teva, you can see that it was all Keser energy. It was energy coming from this transcendental level called Keser, which is infinitely above the entire system. And from there is where Noach's protection was cut. So now, and that's what he explains over here. In order to save Noach, came only through the Teva, through the ark. It's from the innermost. The Teva now generally is from the innermost of Bina. But the innermost of Bina is impacted by Keter, by Keser. As we know that the inside, the deepest inner point of Bina is where Keser, transcendental lights of Keser, reveals itself. And you see that as follows. What were the measurements of the ark? 300 cubits was the length of the ark. 50 cubits, Rachva, was the width of the ark. And 30 cubits was the height of the ark. So 30 cubits up, 50 cubits wide, 300 cubits long. That's about, cubit is about 1.5 feet. So you got to count about 450 cubits of feet long, and then 50, so that would give you about 75 feet wide, and 45 feet tall is this ark. If these cubits were the cubits that we are later referred to in the Torah, which shouldn't be any reason why not. So now, what is the significance of these numbers? So he explains as follows: Keser nikra meya. Keser, the crown. Since crown is still above all the sphirot, above all the attributes. How many attributes are there? There are 10 attributes. Right? Chachma, wisdom, the Kabbalah chart, 10 attributes. Each one of these attributes has 10 in them, because each one is combined from all the others. So 10 times 10 is 100. So once you're coming down into the range of the attributes, into each individual attributes, at best, each attribute is counted for 10. Because let's say, for example, kindness has 10 points in it. It's got the wisdom of kindness, it's got the understanding of kindness, it's got the knowledge of kindness, it's got the kindness of kindness, and the gevura of kindness. So each one could be counted only as 10, not more. But Keser, since Keser is the potential and the source from all the attributes, so in Keser is the number 100, because from it will emanate the 10 spheros, where each one is 10. So it's 10 times 10 is 100, but all in the potential, still in the source. And that's why Keser is referred to as the number 100. Now this is sourced in the Zohar. The Inyan when the Zohar speaks about the deeper significance about Sarah's life, so it says in the verse that her life was Me'ah Shana, 100 years. And then Me'ah Shana, and then 20 years, V'sheva Shana and 7 years. She lived 127. But the Zohar says 100 years means she was tapping Keser. That's the 100 years referring to Keser. Me'ah Shana B'chinas Keser, that's the Keser, Shekol, Yud, V'yud Miyud. The reason why Keser is 100, because the Zohar says, because over there it includes, Keser includes 10. And each 10 have 10 inside. So therefore, Keser is the potential for 100. The Yud Meyud, Uboy Cheshben Ameyos, and therefore in it is the Cheshben of hundreds. That's the number 100. Now by the Teva, you don't have anything that's 100. You do have the length of the Teva is 300. So you have 100, but not 100. You have not 100, you have 300. So what does that mean? What we need to have right now is just to bear in mind just one idea. Once we're talking 3 digits, we're talking at the level of Keter, because the level of Keter is 3 digits. Now, why is it then 300 to be 100? So he's going to explain. Because we're not dealing over here, and Noach was not picked up outside of the universe. Noach was being saved within the world. So the energies of Keter had to permeate and come down into the construct of creation to protect it. So where did Keter descend? This 100, it went into the first 3 Chachma Bina Das, the 3 Mochen, the 3 Sfirot, Chachma Bina Das, which are the 3 intellectual faculties, were permeated with the energy of Keter. When Chachma Bina and Das are being counted for their own power, for what they themselves present. So Chachma is 10, Bina is 10. That's why, for example, by Sarah it says she lived 20 years, 120 years. So the 20 represent perfection of Chachma and Bina, because Chachma is 10, and Bina is also 10. But when you have the energy, the Keter, which is 100, which is triple digits, but descending and permeating into the three spheres of Chachma, Bina, and Das, you get 300 cubits. So 300 cubits is the idea of the 3 mochen, the 3 intellectual faculties, which generally are only double digits, but because they're not standing on their own, they're now infused with Keter light, with the light of Keter, which is triple digits, which represents 100. So it becomes 300. Now you'll see that the Teva also has 30. The height was 30. The 30 of the height were Chachma Bina Das on their own. The Chachma Bina Das on their own without the infusion. That's the 30. But the length represents not just Chachma, Bina, and Das, the 3 intellectual faculties, but as they are permeated with this infinite compassion and kindness from Keter. And that's why it's 300. So what we're left now to still explain is what are the 50 cubits. So the 50 cubits are the 50 gates of Bina. Now, why are you counting Bina twice? You're actually counting Bina 3 times. Once is Chachma, Bina, Das permeate in the 300, because Chachma, Bina, and Das permeated with the light of Keter, which makes it 300. Then in the 30 cubits tall, you have Chachma, Bina, Das as they stand on their own. And then Bina itself is another 50 cubits. Looks like the Teva was primarily an entity of Bina. Pnimius Bina. He doesn't give much explanation. I don't know, and I don't either have the explanation because he doesn't explain it. Just getting over here the formula. What's the formula? The drawing of Keter down into the Mochen, into the Chachma Bina Das, and Noach is being invited inside together with all those animals, with the protection of this infinite kindness of Keter, is the only thing that can stand up against the fury of the Mabul, of the flood. And that's what he's explaining over here. Okay, yeah. The Esrim Shana and 20 years, which it says by Sarah that she was 20 years, it represents Abba ve'Ima, father and mother, which is Chachma and Bina. Shebehem Cheshben Asirus, which over there you have the numbers of tens, which is double digits. Kiem Klulim Rakme Esther, like we said earlier. Why double digits? Because each one is included only of 10. And that's why by the Teva, but they argue at 30 cubits tall, Chabad, that represents the Chachma Bina Das. Each one incorporates 10. It's really 3 levels, Chachma Bina Das, but since each one has 10 inside of it, it becomes 30. And then together you have 30 Keniskaliya. This is when you're dealing with the height. But the length of the Teva, Shloish Meyas Ames, 300 Ames, what is that? I know how they are. Oris HaKeser Bechabad. It's not just the Chachma Bina Das. It's the Chachma Bina Das, which is the wisdom, understanding, and knowledge, as they are infused with this transcendental, infinite light of Keter. So that adds and takes it from 2 digits and elevates it to 3 digits. Each one of them becomes 100. Just like the Keter is called 100. And then between all 3 of them, and that's why you get the 300 cubits. And that's the length. The length represents the flow of energy from Keter to Chabad, and that's called long. Why it's called long, I'm not sure. Maybe because Keser is called Erech Anpin. I'm not exactly sure why that's associated with length, not width, or not height. Why we attribute that idea to length. Now then it's 300. But if it's not with that infusion of Keser, in other words, it's only the intellectual powers on their own, and then they're only 30. And what's the 50 cubits? That's the 50 gates of Bina. Bina, we know it's 50 gates. So we're left with one last measurement, which we haven't discussed yet. So the Teva, the Torah says, it's 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, 30 cubits tall. But then it says on the top, it went crooked on the top, the roof, and then it flattened out on the top, and there was 1 cubit on the top. Vel amma, and to 1 amma, techilena, you should conclude it momaila above. So it wasn't a complete, triangle. And up, it went up, but then it flattened out, and there was 1 cubit on the top. What is the significance of that 1 cubit? That's the essential light of Keser. Because when we're saying 300, that's the way Keser is infusing downward into Chachma Bina Das, which means it's the radiance of Keser. It's not Keser itself. It's the lights of Keser, which the lights of Keser are 100. Since they're now taking hold in the 3 attributes of Chachma Bina Das, it's becoming 300. But you're getting the number 100. The essence of Keser, number 1, it's not 3, it's 1. Number 2, it's not 100, it's not even 100, it's only singular 1. Why? Because we have to differentiate between Keser, the more expression of Keser, and Keser itself. This that we said that Keser is 100, that's because Keser is a potential for 100 lights, for 100 sfirot. The 10 sfirot, and each one 10 times 10. But that's only as Keser is a potential for something. But then there is the essential light of Keser for itself. Over there, it's just a singular truth, a singular oneness. So over there, it's again, we go back to 1 digit and the singular 1. So Vel Amma Techilena Mamayla is the essence of the light of Keser itself, as it stands for his own, as he explained. Keser Nikra Gam Beloshin Yechidus. Keser sometimes is also in a single digit. Kidua as it is known by Inyan Yachid va'achas. That Yachid is in Keser. Shebchinas Yachid hu beKeser. Achas is lower, recipient of Keser, but Yachid is in Keser. V'chein Inyan Achas. Achas v'yachas. Tam Kamashikasa the Zayir Apasik v'yichai circles when by the sprinkling of the Kohen Gadol, when the Kohen Gadol goes into on Yom Kippur, he goes into the Holy of Holies and he sprinkles 1 up and 7 down. And each time he says, when he sprinkled up, he counted 1, and then when he sprinkled the 7 sprinkles down, he would go 1 and 1, 1 and 2. So why does he keep on remembering the 1, recalling the 1? He did that 1 already. Why does he keep on repeating it? So it's explained because the 1 that he's referring to is really, he's drawing from up, from very high, which is Keser, and he's drawing it into the 7 midot, the 7 emotions which need repair, which were damaged as a result of our sins. So when he draws down that light, he's bringing a repair, he's bringing healing into all levels from the lights of Keser. And again, that's learned out from the word achas. So you see from here that Keser is also symbolized in number 1. And the reason is like it says in Zohar, now the very same Zohar that he mentioned earlier. Just like this lamp, it gives all kinds of lights into all directions. But when you're going to look at the lamp itself, you're going to find it's only one singular lamp. But yet it's giving off all the flame, all the lights in all directions. The Keser, which is Ein Sof. Yesh, but Beis B'chinas Hanal, since it's infinite, it has these 2 elements. Oishu Echad Yachid V'atzmusai, or it is singular 1 and absolute oneness. Oy Kishem Mispashit, or when it expands, when it projects. As a Mispashit, then it expands into infinite potential. L'chalakim Rabbe B'lishir, to an endless possibility. Much more than the 10 attributes. 10 attributes are far more defined, and therefore their potential is far more limited. But Keter is still a much far more primordial state, and therefore it's still on a level of pure Ein Sof, and its ability of ispashtos, of expansion, is infinite. And therefore it's both. It's 100 and also 1. Alken Humeya. And that's why he's 100, the Hemrak Eser, and the spheres are only 10, Ein Sham. But on the other hand, it's also 1, which is indivisible and unnumbered, so to speak. The Noach needed this enormous high-powered energy from Keter to protect it. They should nitzel min mabel, that he should be saved from the mabel, because the mountains couldn't save him. Because the ordinary kindness that is generally dedicated towards creation was inactive. Why? He was saved from the mabel, because the powers of feminine gevura became so intensified at that time that everything else was shut down. And now, gevura is the nukva, vehe gevura is the ema. Both the gevura of Malchus and the 5 gevuras of Bina. He was not possible for him to be saved only when the lights of Keter are coming down. It's simple mercy, and it has no limitation at all. And this can counter and can sweeten the judgments from Bina. And that's why when Keter was shining into Chachma, Bina, and Das, as a Nitzel Noach, and as much as Noach was concerned, it saved Noach, Inyan Teivas, and this was his protection that he had. What an amazing piece. Based on this, we'll also understand what it says in the Medrash. Later, when God makes a covenant with Noach, he makes the covenant of the rainbow. And what does he say over there? That the rainbow will serve as a reminder that I will never flood the world again. And it says, Bein Elokim, between Elokim, ubein Nefesh Chaya, and between every living being. Simply, it's between God and every living being. He's going to learn. In between Elokim in this case is Bina. Nefesh Chaya, the soul of life, is Malchus, because Malchus is the soul of creation. When there is a cross energy going from Elokim and Nefesh Chaya and Malchus below, together they're stimulating, they're aggravating each other's gevurais, disciplining energy, judgments. You need something to come and break that. Because if these two powers get together, the powers that we say gevura of mother and daughter, it can destroy. So you need to place some kind of a barrier in between, and that's the keshes. That's the rainbow. That's what the Medrash says. It's between the midas adin shalamayla, between the higher attribute of judgment, midas adin lamata, and the lower element of judgment. So what does the Medrash mean? There's a lower element of judgment, there's a higher element of judgment, and in between them comes the rainbow. The keshes, in general, keshes, which is a bow, represents the genital, the element of Yesod, because Yesod is like a bow. That's why Chazal compare it many times, that it's like it shoots the hashpah, it shoots the zera, so it's like an arrow that shoots by Yosef it says that he controlled his keshes. So keshes is the element of Yesod, which is the masculine energy. The 3 colors of the rainbow is the hamshacha coming from this masculine kindness, so to speak. And this is a sign. This should not allow anymore, like we spoke earlier, that the masculine energies of kindness calm the feminine judgments. These 2 gevuras should not get out of check. And now to bring a mabel. That's what the Medrash means, between the upper midas adin, between the upper attribute of judgment, and the ema, which are the higher, the gevuras of the mother, and the attribute of judgment below, which is the gevura of Malchus, which is called nukva. They are keshes, through the keshes. I will see it to remember. That the earth became destroyed in front of Elokim. Elokim is gevura. The world became destroyed from the Gevuris, because the Gevuris were so intense, they burned the world. Zel Soid, and this is also the secret. Maimar Azawa, the sages say, Doira Mabel, the generation of the flood, were judged. In which way? Beroischen kilkalu, with heat, they corrupted. They corrupted themselves with roischen, with hot. And with scorching hot, they were punished. What does it mean? They caused upon themselves these powerful scorching fires, which are the fires of Gevura, from above and from below. That's the idea of the hot. It's Gevura is hot, heat. And why was that? Because they corrupted with heat, because they brought themselves to a heated state, which is a sexual excitement, and they brought they wasted their seeds, which means instead of it being used in the proper manner in which it's transmitting to the right place, because they also had that same in the emergence of this wasted seed. So then the Gevuris element, the elements of judgment, remained unsweetened. And then the only saving power was this Teva, was this ark. So what does that mean then to us? Number one, we realize how careful we have to be, particularly in this particular, and it's a test, especially today's days. It's a very big test because it's so accessible for us. All kinds of chazarai, all kinds of impure images, whether it's on the street, whether it's on the internet, whether it's on, and people have access to all kinds of immoral things. And there is an internal evil inclination inside of us, and especially people that are more sexually driven, can be very, very, very tempted. And this is as difficult. It's a very hard Yetzer Hara. And so one bears in mind how important it is to be careful, because if one's sexual energy only goes into the right place, then it above brings about the same thing of the sweetening of the judgments. And God forbid, in another way, it can cause that there should be lacking in this coolant, as we said earlier, that cools the judgments, which is a very, very powerful idea to think about. And the other idea is that if, God forbid, we're lacking in this particular area and we need to go to a Teva, in other words, you need protection, and you need your protection from Keter. And Keter means an infinite kindness. And that would mean that's why perhaps that could be the reason why it says that for this particular sin, in order to be forgiven, one needs to give a lot of tzedakah. A lot. They used to do a lot of fasting, but now it's a lot of tzedakah. Because when you give a lot of tzedakah, then you're drawing from this infinite compassion. And the infinite compassion can stand up against the mabul. Just simply on a technical element, for a person to be safe, secure, and everything should be great. Let's hope Mashiach comes very soon, and we will be enthralled and excited about good things and holy things and godly things, and we won't waste our energies, God forbid, in that which is unholy and that which is not good, but only in holiness. Everybody should be blessed, and only good, and only a bracha to everyone.